Why does my camera look so bad? Hang on. Let me just... Whew. It's a little bit better. I have to mess with it a little bit, but for now that's good. Hello everybody, welcome back to your Weekday Weekend. Thanks for joining me, I'm Adam. Today we're going to talk about 3D printing Dungeons & Dragons minifigures. If you like Dungeons & Dragons and you have a 3D printer, then 3D printing the minifigures is a fantastic way to get some more value out of your printer. It's not all that hard. In saying that, I've had dozens and dozens of models fail. If you have an FDM 3D printer, then you might be in for a wild ride unless you know the tips and tricks. Luckily, I've done a good amount of 3D printing minifigures for my latest campaign, and I might be able to help you out a little bit. First and foremost, to get more detail out of your models, I would reduce the layer height about as much as you possibly can. In fact, if you can get away with it, I would go to a smaller nozzle size and go to maybe 0.04 or 0.05 layer height. However, it's worth noting that a lot of minifigures you might only use for 1 or 2 or 3 sessions, so it might not be worth putting the extra time and effort into printing them with a smaller layer height. For example, some of the main story characters in Hoard of the Dragon Queen, Rezmir for example, are only seen on rare occasions. Despite being mentioned a lot, you only really have the opportunity to see her once or twice. So even though it might be fun to give her all the details and exquisite attention that you might give to the player characters, it might not be feasible for you. That's a decision you're just going to have to make. From there, your biggest enemy is supports. Supports are a pain with minifigures, but there's a couple ways you can make it a little bit better. First and foremost, you can try to mitigate some of the supports. By doing a smaller layer height, you can do better overhangs than you normally would with a larger layer height. Think of it like bricks. If your bricks are larger and you try to hang them over each other, like if your edges of the bricks are like this, then this top one might fall. But if your bricks are a lot smaller and you want to achieve the same level of a curve, you can do a lot more. You do a lot more layers, right? So the steps are physically smaller, and thus it's less likely that a brick is going to tilt and fall over. It's kind of the same concept. The other method is to place the supports yourself. It's much easier to remove supports when you've only placed them in spots where it's absolutely necessary. Modern slicers support this, like Orca Slicer or Bamboo Studio, and it makes it way easier. I would use tree supports, and I would try to restrict the supports to touch only the build plate as much as possible. If you've been graced with multi-material capabilities, like with an AMS or an MMU, then it's good to remember that PETG and PLA don't like to stick to each other, so you can use PETG as your supports and then PLA for the actual model, or I guess technically vice versa. So say you've done everything you can to mitigate using supports and you're still having failures, supports are falling, or you have a model like a roper that's just awful to try to remove supports from. Well, you could always just not need supports at all. And this is where today's sponsor comes in. Just kidding, I'm not sponsored by anybody, and I probably never will be. But in all seriousness, the best models are the ones that are supportless. In fact, you'll see all over every repository supportless models because they're so much easier. So why aren't there supportless minis? Well, there are. Of course, I'm talking about Bright Minis. They print supportless, they're FDM friendly, and they're simply amazing. I've printed tons of them now, and my players love them, and so do I, because they're simple to print, they look good, and they're just as nice as any other minis that take ages with supports and other tedious settings to get them to work well. You can even paint them. And I've been printing them for quite a while, and they're pretty good. In fact, most of them you wouldn't even be able to tell the difference, especially if your players don't do any 3D printing. This model, for example, is printed entirely without supports, and so is this one. And they look really good, and all of them do. I even printed a dragon without supports. The tongue's a little weird, but it works. And especially when the dragon's only going to make an appearance once or twice, It's really nice to not have to worry about the possibility of a failed print, especially when the print itself takes many hours. Okay, so technically I have to pay $5 a month to get access to all the Bright Minis models. But don't most people do that anyway with Cult 3D or similar? Even so, 3D printing your own models is still way cheaper than buying some on Amazon. Just look at some of these prices. And those aren't even painted. And sure, neither are the ones you 3D print, but you can print those in fun colors. Kobolds can be red, goblins can be green, etc. Let's not forget, you can still paint 3D printed models. Might be a little bit more difficult, and you definitely have to worry about layer height a lot more so it doesn't show up in the final model, but it's still definitely possible with FDM 3D printing. So, what have we learned? Reduce your layer height as much as time and effort allows. Reduce the number of supports as much as possible. Use supportless models. If you can find one, use a model without supports. That's what you do with any other 3D print. We're very lucky in that most of the requirements for FDM 3D printing are already met with Dungeons & Dragons minifigures. They have a base on them already that the rest of the model stands on. They work well being made out of plastic. They don't need to be made out of that much plastic. They don't require a lot of infill. And if you do it right, you can achieve a good print on a cheap printer. So give it a try. Other than Dungeons & Dragons minifigures, there's tons and tons of other figures, so why not? If you scale one of these up, I'm sure it'll look fantastic on a shelf. Of course, it might take a bit more filament, but still. Anyway guys, I know that was a quick one, but I still thought it was worth sharing. Thanks for spending your day with me. Remember, on my channel every day's a weekend. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and all that stuff. Maybe go follow the Twitch channel, check out the Discord and the website down below for more weekend vibes, and I'll see you next time, next weekend. Bye!